A lot of the kids aren't in right now. I mean, the kids are fully back.
No, and I like the way, they're starting the school later. The children have good breaks. There's breaks in between time. Everything works fantastically. No complaints at all. Loved every minute. Went yesterday, collected all my books, sorted out a lesson or two for this week for one or two of the children. And
really?
Yeah. Now I'm just waiting for a phone call. Come and get your injection, Mrs. Abrahams.
That's
all I need. And if they need me, I'm there. If not, it's not.
Help.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm ready, willing, and waiting. And I'm not cooking anymore because the freezers are full. That's it now. Finished for the week.
Finished. Look, there's plenty of people who can help you empty the freezers if you need. I'm sure they'll do a fine job.
No, at this time, I don't even give my own son's food from my freezer. I won't give any food out at all.
Hey.
I'm very
You can start cooking for Pesach, Rochelle.
Oh, I can't. I've got 20 of the freezers, Valerie. The freezers are full.
Yeah.
I've got 20 of the freezers.
Did someone just say Pesach? Hey.
Yeah.
What's happening for Purim? All the Megillah readings.
We're going to have a big shofar between now and then, very soon, and then we'll all be hearing it from Mashiach himself, hopefully. Big, loud, booming voice. It'll be great. It'll be fantastic.
Oh, yeah. That's okay.
The way things are going, we're going to have to pre-book spaces because worship's still allowed, at least outside of London.
Yeah.
So pre-booking slots on the outdoor, the indoor settings looks like it's going to be a Hashem's help.
Oh,
yeah, but it's full fun and games. Whatever Hashem wants from us right now in the here and now. It's no use thinking about different times. We're living in today.
We are.
We're living in today. And this is what Hashem treasures us for. So this is what we'll do. This is how we'll work.
Yeah. We work with
We're going to do it for Simcha.
Yeah.
You know what? Let's talk about what's happening this week in the Yiddish calendar.
Yes.
Because it's very relevant. What's happening in the Yiddish calendar this Shabbos. What a Shabbos. The Shabbos of a lifetime, the Shabbos of the year. It's the Shabbos which happens to be the 10th day of the month of Shvat. And Yud Shvat in our generation is like one of the greatest, most relevant days. It's the day the Rebbe in 1951 said the first Maimer, accepting upon himself in the Hasidic ways to be the Rebbe.
Yeah.
And 1951 to 2021 makes 70 years. So we're celebrating 70-year anniversary from the first Maimer. It's a big deal. It's a very big deal. And if you want to think about how big a deal it is, you could just think about the fact that so many of the gifts that the Rebbe has given to our generation since is a gift that we wouldn't have short of Yud Shvat. So really Yud Shvat is a celebration of that, of all that tremendous energy, tremendous goodness that the Rebbe shared with us. There's one beautiful story I heard recently of what it means to have a Rebbe. I'm throwing a little story. I'm sorry I'm taking some of the precious of your time, but the story's always good. So the story goes, it's a story of a Rebbe thinking about individuals. Connects very much to 2 weeks ago we read about Moshe, Rabbeinu, chosen by Hashem, because he didn't only lead the masses, he led each individual. This is an unbelievable story. It's one of the stories from a long time ago, with enough time to be verified and ready for the story to come round on itself. It was the family called the Sofer family, a Sofer. They lived in Israel. They were very, very involved in the setting up of the state of Israel, very idealistic Jews who lived in Eretz Yisrael. And for many years, they were very involved in the Zionistic movement. And as time went on, they started getting a little bit disillusioned with the fact that people around them were people, human. And of course, everywhere we turn, there's always a little bit of corruption, and sometimes a little bit more than a bit, and personalities, and people start losing the idealism and exchanging it for comforts or for other things. And eventually they lost interest in the whole thing. So much so that they decided they're going to move out as far away as they can from anything to do with Zionism or Judaism in general. And they ended up moving to a far, far away place, as far as they could get. They ended up in New Zealand. And there in New Zealand, they decided they will not teach their children anything about religion, anything about Judaism or Zionism or anything similar. And for years it was okay. Until one time the children came home from school and they were discussing a big man dressed in red who brings gifts around the tree. And they wanted to know how come they don't have no gifts. They didn't mind so much about the tree, but what about the gifts? And the conversation started becoming, and the parents had to decide, should we mention what it's about and say we have nothing to do with it? But they'd much rather not even mention it. Eventually it came to the point they had to say that there is different religions. They happen to be born Jewish, but they have nothing to it. And the kids insisted and insisted, and eventually they said, you know what? Fine, we'll do just the menorah. And it'll be only that, just candles. And there'll be nothing else, nothing religious about it. And as you can imagine, the story goes that from the menorah, it dragged into another, only one thing. And eventually, slowly, the parents had no choice, but had to try and answer some of the questions. And they answered more questions and more questions. And eventually it came to the point where the children were asking questions that the parents could not answer. And at a certain point, the father says to the children, I don't know. I wasn't brought up in a religious home. I didn't ask so many questions. You are asking questions that I don't know. I don't even know where to look for answers. And they decided, the father and the child decided to sit down together and to say to the God of Israel. And they said, Hashem, if you exist, and as the story goes, you had a Moshe Rabbeinu who led the Jews, then you probably have a Moshe today. So if you are around, please send your Moshe to come and teach us. And that's how they prayed. It happened to be, it was a Shabbos. The next day was Sunday, and the father is walking down the street in Auckland, New Zealand, the capital, and as he's walking down the street, there is a rabbi in a beard and a hat and a jacket and all. He looks just like the rabbis of old that he remembers from Israel, walking through the streets of New Zealand. He could not believe it. He runs over to him and gives a massive bear hug. And he's telling him, you must come to my house. I can't believe it. He drags him literally to his house. And they sit for hours schmoozing and talking. And eventually, before he leaves, they make up that he's going to send him books and they'll be in touch. And eventually this family, Hasofer, ended up becoming the parents of a fully practicing Yiddish family. And years went on, and the child who was the asker of the questions grew up and got married, and she moved to Eretz Yisrael and lived in Israel. And at a certain point, she happened to make friends, and she was talking to the daughter of Reb Chaim Gutnick from Sydney, Australia, from Melbourne, Australia. The parents had moved to Sydney, and they were schmoozing. And there she was talking about this one time that her father got a call, Matzah Shabbos, right as Shabbos in New York went out, and called up Reb Chaim Gutnick, telling him that he should get onto a plane and fly straight away from Australia and go to New Zealand. And that was the end of the instructions. And he picked himself up, went onto a plane and flew down to New Zealand. And as he's walking through the streets, a guy walks over to him and Pashut bear hugs him in the middle of the street, some stranger. Random guy drags him to his house until she realized that this was the story of her father. And the Rebbe had called up Matzah Shabbos right after Shabbos finished in New York and instructed Reb Chaim Gutnick to go to New Zealand. He didn't tell him what, but there was a cry, a call to the Moshe Rabbeinu, the leader of the generation, and saying, please come and help us. And he heard the cry. And this is the story of how this entire family turned around. The actim to look to le'echad echad. The Rebbe's job, the Moshe Rabbeinu's job is to work with the people, one by one. And the Rebbe expects and relies on Hasidim, on his collaborators, on his followers to take up the mission and take up the call. And that's how we understand the Rebbe Chassid relationship. This is how we appreciate that the Rebbe is not just a genius, of course, not just an enormous Talmud Chacham, man of great insight, great ideas and suggestions to us. But a Rebbe, a Moshe Rabbeinu, who cares for each and every individual. This is your Shvat. This is the time where we think about, what have I given to the Rebbe? What have I brought to the Neshama HaKlolis, a general Neshama like Moshe Rabbeinu was, the Neshama of our generation. And Yud Shvat is a day where there would be a Farbrengen, one of the greatest Farbrengens of the year, on par with Yud Tes Kislev. And there would be enormous amount of talk, of inspiration, of direction poured upon the followers on this special day. We are it. This is the day that's coming up this Shabbos. So we need to make it special. It doesn't happen by itself. It doesn't come to us. We don't realize it on our own. But if we stop and we think, we put a bit of time into appreciating what it means to have a director, an instructor, a mentor who cares about every single one of us. And when we can work on ourselves to appreciate that, Yud Shvat becomes alive, a source of energy. This is what we focus on this whole week leading up to Yud Shvat, the joy of knowing that we have purpose and that we're not on our own. There's a beautiful Hayom Yom in which the Rebbe describes that in the times of the Alter Rebbe, Hasidism. So the fact that you have a Rebbe and a Chassid, it was never before Rosh Hashivas or great sages. What was accomplished was that the loneliness, the individual mission that a person has on their own, that loneliness was changed so that the leader isn't lonely and the followers are not lonely. We have a companionship. We have a working team that we work on this together, the Rebbe in his position, leading, and us taking up the call. But this is something that we need to remind ourselves. Yud Shvat is coming, it's a special time. And of course, the Rebbe's greatest call to us was to make the world ready for Mashiach. Starting with ourselves. This is what we're going to do today. We're going to learn a little bit of Torah. We're going to look through the Parsha to find a life message that will help us become ready for Mashiach, to help us to live in a way that Mashiach is our reality, for real. And when we can live in it in that way, then a lot of things change. The color of our outlook, the color of our glasses, our lenses change. We see things in a greater light. And when we can do that, we're well on track. So let's do it. Let's learn some Parsha. I just want to say, if anyone has any questions or suggestions, comments, or something to speak up, please unmute yourself at any time. Either a *6 on your phone, or you could always just do the unmute if you have a computer. So we're going to do about a summary of the Parsha. It's Parshas Boy. It's a Parsha that most of us have read good pieces of often, because the Seder night, the Haggadah, the story of leaving Mitzrayim, is in this week's Parsha. This is where it happens. Out of all the 53 to 54 Parshas of the Torah, Parshas Boy this week is leaving Mitzrayim. We're leaving Egypt. We're finally reading it, and it's happening now. It's happening in the cycle of reading the Parshas. It's this week. And we start off, obviously, with the end of the 10 plagues, the last 3 of the 10 plagues. We're starting with the Arba, the locust, and then the darkness, and then the final blow. The plague that breaks the camel's back, the plague of the death of the firstborn, that's when Parah gives in. But between the plague of darkness and the 10th plague, the day of the death of the firstborn, Makas B'chiris, a lot of things have to happen, which this Parsha lists out. Of course, we have the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh already. We also have the mitzvah of Korban Pesach that slipped in, because the date of Makas B'chiris, the anniversary of the death of the firstborn, is Seder night. Now we think of Seder night as commemorating leaving Mitzrayim. Actually, the very first Seder night was whilst we were still in Mitzrayim. We were still in Egypt. We still weren't free. And Hashem instructed us to have a full-on Seder. Not only a Seder night with the Korban Pesach, we had to bring the lamb. You remember, we painted the doorposts with the blood, and we had to stay indoors. But we also had matzah. on that first night. And the obvious question is, isn't matzah to commemorate leaving Mitzrayim and the dough didn't bake and it stayed, it didn't rise? Sorry, it baked, but it didn't rise. And it turned into matzah, as recorded in this week's parasha. It's true. That's the reason, and that's what we remember when we eat matzah. But it's also a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to eat matzah on the Seder night. And that mitzvah was invented by Hashem before leaving Mitzrayim. And we had to eat matzah whilst we were still in Mitzrayim, together with the Korban Pesach. Matzah, Korban Pesach, eat it indoors, get ready to run as soon as the time is. And at midnight, boom. At every household of every Egyptian, there were death of the firstborn all over the show. And there was screaming and shouting. And Paro comes running. Jews, dead, out of here. Go, 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 go as fast as you can. You couldn't get it out fast enough. And now it was Moshe's turn to turn around to Paro and said, actually, no, we're not going to go. When you tell us go, we're going to go when Hashem says go. And Hashem says go tomorrow in the morning. So in the meantime, calm down, because we're going to go whenever Hashem says. And of course, the next morning before they leave, there was another mitzvah. A mitzvah just for that day, which was to go around to the Egyptian neighbors and to ask them for all sorts of treasures, gold and silver, garments and dishes, and fantastic supply of goods, which the Egyptians were more than happy to give away to the Yidden, because Hashem had made the Yiddish a favor and then find favor in the Egyptian neighbors, and they couldn't give them enough. And then the Yiddish people left Mitzrayim. And all of that is in this week's parsha. At the end of the parsha, we learn a number of mitzvahs, instructions that are for generations. These are some of the first mitzvahs which were given to us before Sinai, before Matan Torah, before we got the Ten Commandments and the other mitzvahs afterwards. We already got some mitzvahs before that, like Pidyon Haben, redemption of the firstborn son, corresponding to the death of the firstborns. So we have a mitzvah to redeem the firstborns. We also had the mitzvah of making Pesach every year, which includes eating matzah and not eating chametz. And we got the Lebincha telling over the story. All of that are recorded in this week's Sedra as instructions for Yidden, for Jewish people, even before the giving of the Torah is recorded. And then one last mitzvah to top it off is the mitzvah of tefillin. Tefillin, Jewish men have to wrap the boxes with the leather straps around the arm and over the head. And inside the box will be and is the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, as well as the mitzvah of tefillin. And it'll be a sign, a symbol of our freedom by Hashem. And of course, freedom does not mean free to do nothing, because doing nothing is not freedom. Freedom means that we have the freedom to be purposeful. We have the freedom to do what we really want to do, what we were born to do. And that sort of freedom is freedom symbolized by the tefillin. We wear the tefillin as a reminder of Yetzias Mitzrayim, of leaving Egypt. And it's one of the things that we have to think about as we put on tefillin. The kavanah of tefillin is to remind ourselves that Hashem created heaven and earth, but then Hashem is in control, and He took us out of Mitzrayim, and He's telling us what to do, and that we can have self-control, and we should have self-control. All of that is tefillin bound upon our arms and placed upon our head, and that is a mitzvah which the parasha ends off with. So it's a loaded parasha. You can imagine the amount of books and talks and videos that teach about lessons we can learn from this week's parasha is enormous, because the whole Pesach, Seder night, the whole Yetzias Mitzrayim story is all in this week's parasha. So there's loads to talk about, loads. We're going to pick one area that perhaps isn't always focused on, and we're going to try and look at maybe a fresh angle from this week's parasha. And of course, the practical lesson is how we can be more prepared, more on fire, more passionate about life today, so that we know how to make life switched on as a generation about to enter Geula. Last week we read that on the brink of Geula, the brink of redemption, it's hard to believe it will actually happen. And even when Moshe shows up and he says, I'm taking you out of this, we're leaving, it's hard for us to listen. We can't even believe. Even when we see pointers that seem to point in that direction, it's hard for us to imagine that it will actually happen. And that's exactly what we have to learn from the past. That even when it's hard and it seems unbelievable, impossible, that's when we need to know it's actually happening. And in our generation, we're taught that there's a trick that we can use. Spend time learning about Mashiach. Spend time learning about what it's going to be like when redemption happens. And that's the trick. Because when we spend time with something, we learn to develop accordingly. We learn to develop accordingly. So we're going to spend time learning about what it looks like to do things Mashiach style, redemption style. We do things the way it's supposed to be, and then the trick will be to try and live with it, to try and develop that way. So let's do something. Let's learn a bit of Parsha. If anyone has any questions or suggestions, please unmute yourself anytime. Okay, it's very quiet. I'm not going to take any misunderstandings. Here we go. We're going to jump right into the shir. It's Parshas Bait. The lesson we're focusing on today is parenting. Now, of course, everybody who was born, and that includes every Yiddish boy who decided they're not going to be a Yid and started a different religion, whatever, every human being is born to parents. Everybody has a parent. And therefore, parenting implies that there was a child, because if not, you can be adult, you can be married, you can be living with somebody, but unless you have a child, you're not a parent. So parenting implies children. Children implies parents. Parenting isn't only about you. Parenting isn't only about you. It sounds so obvious, sounds so simple. Of course. What else would your parenting be about? Me? And of course, the answer is no. So often we forget. And we think about, I want to be a good parent, instead of thinking, I want to make sure that my child has a good parent. So is it about making sure I have a good self-image? Or is it I have to have a good self-image so that my child should have the parent that they need? The beautiful story about the mother who, unfortunately, back in the shtetl, couldn't afford much food. And at one point, all they had left was one little slice of bread. And the kids are looking at the slice of bread. Who's going to get it? What's going to be? Until daddy comes home and brings more food. Who should have this piece of bread? And at a certain point, when the kids are not looking, the mother takes the piece of bread and she brings it with her into her room and she closes the door. And everyone's looking around. Where's the bread gone? Where's mommy gone? And they start knocking on the door. Open the door, open the door. And I said, no, I'm busy. I need to take care of something. Whoa, what's going on, mommy? What's going on? And she quickly is eating the bread. She says to the children, children, I'm making sure you have a good mommy. I'm making sure you have a good mommy. And she ate the slice of bread. And that's the story. Because our parents need to have good children. And of course, we're talking about children and grandchildren, but it's code words. Because really, we're also children. And we also have to make sure that the child within us has good parenting. And we are responsible to parent the child within us accordingly. It's very easy to say, oh, my parents didn't teach me this. I didn't grow up with that and the other. Parenting. Parenting the child, the children around us, and the child within us. This is what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And we're going to try and pick up or discuss, refresh the Hasidic approach to parenting, the Hasidic approach to educating, and most importantly, the Hasidic approach to the perspective to recognize that the child around us or within us is the child of Hashem. That's going to be the focus of today's lesson. And when we recognize that the child is the child of Hashem, it's a game changer. It changes a lot of things, and it makes things very different. So let's start. Let's start off with having children. Why do people have a child? Why do parents decide to become parents? Anyone have any suggestions why normal, sane intelligent people decide to give up and share any money they're going to earn, any spare time they'll have, any privacy they ever had is going to have to be shared. Anytime they go on a holiday, it's going to have to be level, whatever. And basically the rest of the life forever is going to have to be chopped, split, shared. Why would intelligent people choose to have children? Help me out.
Because you don't think
it's a human urge to reproduce.
Okay. Would you say it's a human mashagas? A human craze?
No.
No, I hope not.
Of course it's not. It's the most wonderful thing of all to become a parent.
I'm listening.
And to procreate is what Jewish people actually want to do, or they do if they're lucky enough to be able to have those children.
Okay.
So it's a privilege.
It's definitely a privilege. It's definitely what we do. And it's definitely something that we have an urge to do. It's natural to want to have children. It is.
Yeah, but if you think of all those things that you said on your fingers, you'd never have a child because the time would never be right. You'd never have enough money. You'd never have enough this. You'd never go. You don't think of that. You just think of a beautiful child, a baby.
So we ignore the facts and we just get on with doing what we feel like doing?
Not exactly.
People, so I'm going to be controversial. For some people, it's about having someone to look after them in their old age.
It's not a bad thing. Or you can rephrase that and say continuity, leaving a legacy.
No, there's another strange thing is that when you become a grandparent, your children suddenly become almost more knowledgeable than you. And like, you have to answer to them sometimes. It's a very funny phenomena. But I don't know if that's just my family. It could be because I'm not very bright. But at some time, the children seem to overtake, which is a very strange thing. But it's good.
It sounds like it reminds remembrance of when teenagers suddenly turn into the teens.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they know everything.
Yeah.
So maybe it's similar.
It is similar. Bit more worrying when you're getting older and they've got a better memory than you, though.
Okay. But going back to the point at hand, why do people have children?
They want to become a family.
We want to become a family. We're doing well. We want to be able to have someone to look after us when we're older. We want to be able to be responsible. I think it's a calling in life. It's something that we feel that if we don't do, and then we are letting down the purpose for which we were born. It's almost like it's subhuman to not have children. Now, at least I'm going to rephrase that, to not try to have children. There are a lot of people that try to ignore those sorts of feelings. Like there are people who choose to ignore other feelings. Like it's natural for a person to want to be upright. There are things that blind us and distract us. But there is, Baruch Hashem, part of the human nature, human condition, there's almost a given that people prefer to be able to have children.
The thing is, we're hormonally driven to reproduce. And that's the saddest thing when people cannot have children because they still have that hormonal drive. Yeah,
absolutely.
They still have the hormonal drive, and if we look at Leah and Rachel, you know, and the contest in a way between them, and they were even using mandrakes, weren't they, as a fertility? Yeah. You know, and Rachel said, well, if you let me have the mandrake, you know, I'll let you stay with Jacob
that night. And the same thing with with Jacob's mother and with his grandmother. Sarah didn't have children for a while and she was very broken about it, as was Rivka. Correct. But we're going to talk a little bit more Yiddishkeit. I like how we're bringing the Torah stories in here. What does Yiddishkeit say? Why should we have children?
Be fruitful and multiply.
It's the very first construction. Go forth and multiply. And amazingly, this mitzvah is performed not by having children, but by trying to have children. It's true that the mitzvah is fulfilled once the children are born, a son and a daughter, but the mitzvah for a human being is doable, and we have to do the best that we can, regardless of the results. which is important for people to know. Let's take a second now, just a moment, to give everyone who needs a bracha for children. Healthy children, gesunde children, children who will bring nachas to everybody who needs. And if you can think of the names of anybody that you know, now's a good time. We should learn in their schus. But yes, it's an important mitzvah to have children. But equally, as it's a mitzvah to have children, may everybody who needs that bracha have the bracha. There's a follow-up mitzvah that follows right on after the mitzvah of having children, which is to educate children. We say it in the Shema. We have a responsibility to teach our children. And what's fascinating about teaching our children is that it's something that Hashem feels very important, very close to Hashem's heart, so to speak. So much so that we think about Avraham Avinu, the first of the forefathers. Avraham Avinu, who Hashem treasured. Avraham Oyava, Avraham my beloved. Hashem loved Avraham. What did Hashem see in Avraham so much? Says the Pasuk, what Hashem saw in Avraham so much was his ability, education, parenting. 1 second, says the Pasuk, I have known him, as in Avraham, because he instructs his children and his household after him that they should keep the way of God to perform righteousness and justice. Therefore, God will bring upon Abraham the blessings he spoke concerning him. Hashem sees how Avraham takes parenting, educating his children seriously, and therefore Hashem cherished Avraham, primarily because he instructs his children and his household. Now the word instructs, yitzavah, can also mean connects. In other words, all of Avraham's achievements pale in comparison to his instructing and connecting others as well, making them too meritorious. This advantage, this tremendous gift that Avraham had, that he tried to educate his children, the people around him, is the tremendous closeness Hashem felt. Hashem treasured Avraham Avinu. He was his beloved. He cherished him primarily because he spent time and effort trying to nurture and to educate the children and his household, the people around him. And that was a tremendous schus Avraham had. We're going to learn a little bit about what it means to educate. It sounds like an easy thing to do. Look, Avraham taught us how to do it. But it's not easy to educate our children, especially if we have a look at this quick quote that we have here from Mishlei. Mishlei was written by Shlomo HaMelech in his wisdom. Train a child according to his way. Even when he grows old, he will not turn away from it. Train a child according to his way, says the Malbim right away. This means the education must be tailored to the student, because every person is naturally adaptive to something else. Intellectually, some are sharp, while others are more straightforward, and each needs to be taught accordingly. Or a skill set. Each has their own particular niche where they can catch on easily and excel. An educator can identify these by examining what the student is naturally attracted to and strives for, and that becomes the focus. Once identified, the educator must tailor their instruction according to each student's intellectual makeup and skill set. Now let's think about it. The parent has a child. There are children around us, grandchildren, other children. There is children inside of us. There's a child that I have to nurture. We need to spend time and effort to find the intellectual pitch, the skill set which we catch on easily and excel in, and tailor the instruction for each student's intellectual and skill set makeup accordingly. If one follows this approach, then even when he grows old, he will not turn away from it, quote. However, if one educates a child without taking the unique natural inclinations into account, the instruction will fail the test of time. Wow, what a Malbim. Now let's just think for a second. Education, parenting is even trickier than we thought. It's even trickier than we have. But actually, the Rebbe Rashab tells us, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, that it's a mitzvah not only to educate, but to come prepared, to spend time preparing the education. And he goes further, he says it's a daily obligation. Let's read inside. Just as putting on tefillin every day is a scriptural commandment incumbent on every Jew, regardless of whether he's a great Torah scholar or a simple person, so too it is an absolute obligation for every Jew to dedicate time every day to thinking about his children's education. One must do everything in their power, and indeed more than what's in their power, go Hasidim, to see to it that our children follow the path in which they are being guided. And as he says, the way to do that is to tailor the education according to their pitch, according to their level.
I wish.
Oh, 1 second. We wish we had the time. What is our biggest drawback? What's the biggest stumbling block in this exercise? What holds us back the most? Let's not talk about everyone else. Let's talk about ourselves. What is the most difficult part of the read on the screen?
The most difficult part for me is you haven't mentioned the woman. And the woman is the first teacher of every child that we have. And you haven't said anything about the mother of the child, the person who has the child.
I must stop you there. I actually have a read that I skipped because I thought that it wasn't relevant. And the read was the Rebbe making the point of saying that when we talk in masculine terms, especially with education, it is clearly because the Torah often talks in that terms, but it's certainly not because the woman is ever anything less part of the plan. The read goes on. You know what? Let me find the read. It was just funny because I thought there's no way I have to bring this up. Everyone knows this. And there you go. You made the point. So I'm glad you did.
Owen.
Let's bring it up. Where's number 14? Text 14. Quick. Here we go.
Yeah.
Sefer Zichus. Moreover, says the Rebbe, women have a special advantage over men when it comes to education and even to discipline. The feminine qualities in women allow them to impart the guidance with intimate closeness, soft-spokenness, love and affection. Should we read the brackets?
Much more.
Gets controversial. Much more than a man can offer. This is especially pertinent in recent times when it's precisely loving and warm approach to education, train a child according to his way that bears the most fruit. And amazingly, what the Rebbe is highlighting is that first of all, men and women are equal when it comes to educating, but actually it's not. Actually, it's not equal. When it comes to educating, especially with children, and the Rebbe makes a point, in this sikha maybe it's not so clear, in other sikhas more, that's not only when it comes to children. Actually, it's not equal. Actually, it's important for the man to recognize his place and understand that he, as much as he has the best of intentions, it just doesn't cut. So yes, if it has to be said, let us say it and let us read it inside absolutely clear. Nothing we've said so far is obligation upon men. There are some things that are only obligation upon men, such as teaching Torah. Why teaching Torah? Because the woman doesn't have an obligation to teach Torah. She has an obligation to rear the child. She has an obligation to be educated. But to teach Torah is a mitzvah that's a mitzvah for men. And the reason we know that is because the Pasuk tells us that the man has to teach. The man has to learn, and you only have to teach if you have to learn. So not only have to learn if you have to learn, meaning you have to be a student if you have a mitzvah to be a student, but one has a mitzvah to be a teacher if you are of the category of those people who have to learn and study Torah. Now, it's not to say that women don't have an obligation to learn Torah, but it doesn't fall under the obligation of teaching. A woman has an obligation to learn the Torah that she needs in order to know what to do. Men have an obligation to learn Torah regardless if they know everything or don't know everything. If a man happens to have learned for 20 years straight and he knows everything you have to know, he still has the mitzvah to learn, and therefore he falls into the category that has the mitzvah to teach. But a woman definitely brings to the table enormous amounts that a man at his best day can't do. And it's important to recognize this, that today it's more vital than it has ever been in the past. Amazing. But going back to the point at hand, we're asking the question, what is the biggest drawback or stumbling block that we have when it comes to these things? You know, I'm not sure if we're going to do a... Please.
The time element.
Time.
Yeah.
Help me understand what you mean.
Is a father there? Has he got the time when he comes in to? I'm not being facetious. To help the children to understand what's happened in the day, to help the woman, kind of get through to the child if something has happened. Is it a matter of time sometimes that causes friction maybe?
Absolutely. Time is a big constraint. I would say though, we have here on the read on the screen from the Rebbe Rashab, who tells us that there's a mitzvah to put on tefillin every day, and the mitzvah of making time to prepare our education and think it through and recalibrate, and more importantly, to assess what is the necessary element of today. Because importantly, what was very relevant 3 days ago or a year ago might be very different, might be irrelevant today. And something that it was irrelevant a year ago might be the most important thing right now. And having the time to do that is very important. We're just suggesting that actually from the Rebbe Rashab, it seems like nobody says we don't have time to put on tefillin. We would hope that we would at least try to make the time. But yes, time is very hard. You can't really buy time in many places, but it's about creating time for this. Yes, that's one major drawback. Is there anything else that comes to mind?
Yes, I've found that one of the most difficult things is almost like you're fighting against the tide sometimes because of external influences.
Yeah.
Wow. Plus the fact that that children sometimes have their individual, how shall I put it, will.
Yeah.
May not tie in with yours or the Torah, whatever, but and it's very, very hard because it almost feels that you're preaching at them, which they don't like. How often, even in my school days, people used to say they hate religion being shoved down their throat. So it's very difficult to tread that line.
Oh, so I'm going to suggest two things to just to rephrase what you've said. One thing, I think the first thing is that if we don't have success, you don't see how it's working, makes it harder. I think that was the first thing you said, but the second thing you said is even more. Sometimes, with the best of intentions, I'm educating my child, and actually, I'm turning my child further away from where I was trying to bring them to. The way or the idea that I'm presenting is like shoving it down the throat, which is creating resentment. And I am, with my best intentions, I'm creating trouble, which I didn't want to do. And in a sense, the challenge that I've been brought up, the lack of time, the lack of results, and also, of course, the fact that sometimes the best intentions don't necessarily equal the best route. Sometimes we see how a little bit of a shift in language or spending some time doing some other things and then coming back to this could make a world of a difference. But we don't know because our children were not born with an instruction manual. And even if they would have been born, we wouldn't have time to read it.
But also, what about the parents who are not knowledgeable about the Torah, or parents who are misinformed about the Torah and teaching it incorrectly?
And extend that, very good, extend that a little more and say, what about the people who never had the education themselves and what it means to be a moral, upstanding human being? How are they going to teach their children? And it's not easy. It is very true. It's a very true point. Of course, ideally, every parent has to educate themselves also, because we also have a child inside of us. And once we educate ourselves, we might be a little bit better positioned. But it doesn't answer the question. It doesn't answer the challenge. We are expected to be parents. Everybody. Not everybody is expected to be a teacher. But every parent is expected to be a parent. And it's amazing. It's daunting. Very big. It's a very big ask in a way. And this is what we want to talk a little bit about today. How can we ever approach parenting with a head held high, with any sort of expectation for it to work out, when education is so enormous? Parenting is such a big deal. And of course, if we measure by results, then every Yiddish mama is going to have enough excuses to beat themselves up. and to call themselves all names in the sun and never look in the mirror again for the rest of their life, which of course is illegal, because that's a Yetzer Hara. How could a person look down upon themselves if they've tried hard? So certainly we need a Geula approach, a Hasidic approach, to be able to look at education, not by saying, oh, don't worry, it's okay. Don't worry about it. It's not so important. Of course it's important. Yet still be able to somehow walk into education with confidence, with a certainty, and with a clarity of what we need to be doing. We don't have buckets of time waiting around. And we don't have a magic wand that's going to make sure we get it right, or that's going to make sure our children are hearing us, or make sure that we have the background and the knowledge that we need in order to make it work. It will be a struggle, but at least a new perspective that can help us help us work towards it. I do want to say, though, it's important to us to know that there's a Shulchan Aruch. There's a code of Jewish law that codifies the responsibilities. So although there's a lot of responsibilities that are down to what we feel is important, some people feel it's very important to teach our children gardening. And some people feel it's very important to be able to teach our children, I don't know, art, which isn't bad. It's very good, but it's up to the parents' decision. There are other things, though, that are mandated, are legal requirements. In other words, parenting isn't just a moral obligation, it's a legal obligation. It's legislated. It's down in the Shulchan Aruch. Here's a bit about what time it starts to educate. One must begin to train and educate the child to develop good and upstanding character traits from the moment they begin to talk. This is from, who was that from? The Shneur Zabris. And then we have in the Shulchan Aruch. Here are obligations on a father. And I must say, as we mentioned earlier, these obligations are listed for a father and do not include all the obligations parents have, but these are obligations that a father has. Father is responsible to educate his sons and daughters to observe all the mitzvahs. Consequently, if he finds his child violating a commandment, he must ensure they stop and make sure they know that this is improper behavior. The above applies even to rabbinic edicts. So there are certain mitzvahs, for example, on Shabbos. If a light switch was left open in shul, or left off in shul, there are certain times, generally this is not allowed. There are certain times where a child may be tricked into doing the act that is forbidden for an adult to do. However, the father of that child may not be involved in this exercise. Not only that, if the father of the child is present, the father of the child will have to make sure that the child doesn't unknowingly do something that is forbidden on Shabbos. Because the father has an obligation to educate the child. And if the father notices the child, this is specifically the father of the biological father of that child, the father would have to stop the child from doing it and make sure that the child knows that it's not allowed to be done on Shabbos. At what age? You check with your local Orthodox competent practicing rabbi to decide whether the child's age appropriate. But that's the general outline. The father has an additional obligation to educate a child. That's legislated. But it goes more. There are other things that we do. We teach the child even from a very young age. Classic example is lighting Shabbos candles. At 3 years old, a young girl is not obligated in anything. Strictly speaking, if a child of 3 years old ate something non-kosher, they have done nothing wrong. There's consequences, but they have done nothing wrong. They cannot be held accountable. They're a minor. Yet the parents already start teaching the child to do mitzvahs. Light the candle. Be a beacon of brightness. Make the world a lighter place. You can. You're a bracha maker. Start lighting the Shabbos candles, and the child understands and does it. That's some of the education that we do to the child. But some things we do also for the child. And here there's a beautiful quote from the Gemara in the Maseches Kiddushin. You can look it up. some of the obligations that a father has or to do for the child. Number one is, of course, a bris milah. The father has a mitzvah to circumcise his son. And if he can't do it himself, to hire or to get a moil to do it for him, to redeem his son, which is in this week's parasha. When a firstborn male is born to a family of non-Kohen or Levi, then the father has a mitzvah to redeem Pidyon Haben, to pay 5 shekels of silver to a Kohen, to teach him Torah, to marry him off, and to teach him a trade. Gemara goes on to say that a father who doesn't teach the child a trade is basically taught him to be a ganav. And some say a father is also obligated to teach his son to swim. I remember when I was learning this Gemara, I would teach it through it, and maybe it's not only swimming in water, maybe it's also swimming through life. Learn how to understand what's going on around you. But that's the Gemara telling us. A father has certain obligations that are mandatory. Now imagine, mother gives birth to a newborn baby, and the doctor says, and we go here, the doctor comes in and says, dear mother, I know you just had a baby and you love the baby, but I'm asking you, please care for the baby. Please look after the baby. Please educate the baby. Most mothers would be offended by such a request from a doctor. Best of intentions. But of course the parents love the baby and therefore going to educate it. But it's not so simple. Sometimes we forget. Sometimes we forget the importance of teaching our children. Sometimes it's clear as day. But sometimes it's hard and it's not easy. And when it's those times, it's when we have to remind ourselves that actually education and parenting isn't just an urge of the natural instinct. It's much more than that. It's also a mitzvah. And it's a mitzvah that we have to do because Hashem told us to. And when we think in those terms, it already changes a little bit of how we look at our parenting. But it goes more than that. And today we want to focus on one of the psukim that Hashem speaks to Moshe about leaving Mitzrayim. And this is the key to how the Rebbe teaches us Hasidic teachings. Open up a whole new approach to what parenting should look like. It's not just making sure that we have nachas and that we have someone to be proud of. And we can say, look, this is my son. This is my daughter. Look how well I did, which is great. It's not a bad thing, but it's much more than that. What are we talking about? The pasuk says, and so shall you say to Parai, B'ni b'chayri Yisrael. My firstborn son is Israel. This sort of approach, this sort of statement, we have a similar sort of statement in Devarim. You are the children of the Lord your God. Bonim atem l'Hashem elikechem. Bonim atem l'Hashem elikechem. You are the children of Hashem. Who is the child of Hashem? The answer is every single one. Every single one is a child of Hashem. And this, says the Rebbe, is the approach we need to have when it comes to parenting. When it comes to parenting, we must remind ourselves that the children we are parenting are the children of Hashem. How does that change our approach? How does it make things different? The answer is, every child, Jewish child is God's child. The biological father and mother are merely God's messengers who were given the merit to give birth, to raise and educate this special child. But imagine you've got a call from the chief rabbi's office, and the chief rabbi or the head shliach, whoever it is, the Rebbe, whoever it might be, gives you a call and says, I have a grandchild that needs a personal mentor. And I've looked through the phone book, I've looked through all the contacts, I've asked around, and I've decided that the best candidate is you. Is you. Would you take on the job of mentoring my grandchild? So if you said yes to that request, I have a feeling you'd probably spend a lot of time preparing and thinking and researching, and you'd be very careful about how you'd go about doing it. I would take it very seriously, And every time the child upset me or I got into a mood, I remind myself that this isn't just an irregular child. This is a special kid. I've got to look after him. I've got to prepare. And if she's not in a good mood, I have to understand. And here we learn that every child, not just the chief rabbi or the head shliach or the rabbi gave a call, the master of the universe has a child and asked two messengers, a father and a mother, or whoever the circumstances are, and asked them to be the messengers who will raise and educate this special child. This is the approach. So now, of course, the responsibility just went through the roof. In case it wasn't hard enough for us to imagine tailoring our education as per our child's instincts and skill set, we now have the added responsibility of knowing that actually this is a personal child of Hashem himself. But the Rebbe says, hold on, that's just one side of the coin. The same statement is the key to being able to be a chassid, the key to being able to be confident, passionate, and excited. Confident, passionate, and excited to go ahead and educate our children and give it the best we have. To put in the time, not worryism, because as we said, worry is an avera. Worry is a yetzer hara. Anxious, oigeveld, what's going to be? That's the yetzer hara. It's not geula. What's geula? Geula is that we're excited, we're passionate, we're confident, and we're going into this educational exercise like a chassid. What's the key? The key is that the child is a child of Hashem. And Hashem looked through all his contacts. Hashem has a lot of contacts. He's got 7 billion contacts who are alive right now. He's got loads more contacts in previous generations and in future generations. We looked through all of them. And he figured that for the neshama, he needs to put into the world right now the best match for that neshama is these contacts right here. He dialed the number, gave him a call, presented the gift, and he relies on us with confidence. This is what parenting is. Now, of course, remember we said that we talk about our child because it's easier to talk about our child outside of us than it is to talk about the child within us. But it's the same thing. The Rebbeinu Shalom chose our skill set, our circumstances, our environment, our challenges, and our gifts. And he said, for this neshama, this is the best match. Please, educate that child within you, within me. And I am confident that you will do it. You're Hashem's child. And Hashem has chosen, personally chosen, you as the messenger to educate the you. Now, am I worried? No, I'm confident. I'm conscious, and it's a lot of effort, and I don't fool myself to say that it's going to be easy, but I know that the Rebbeinu Shalom is constantly confident in me. And he knows every time that I messed up, he knows about that, and he's still confident, and he's still sure, and he's still absolutely cheering me on to do what I can, because it's Hashem's child. And Hashem is a third partner. There's one more read that I wanted to read. One more spin-off. This is the one we read already. Here we go. One more spin-off on understanding that the child we are educating is the child of Hashem. 3 partners. Hashem chose us to be the other 2 partners in this partnership of educating and raising the child. That idea that gives us the utmost confidence and responsibility, but certainty, passion, excitement that we know that we're going to do this and we'll do it well. We'll give it our best shot. And we're not going to measure by results. We're going to measure by how much we're putting our effort in because we are sure that Hashem is with us. So here comes the 3rd point. And this spin-off is very important. We are running against the clock, but I want to read it inside from Teres Menachem, Tafshin Mem Gimel. There are 3 partners in forming a person, the person's father, the mother, and Hashem. But each carries their own responsibility. The division of responsibility in this partnership is as follows. Listen carefully. The biological parent, and he wraps them up as one, father and mother between the two of them, are responsible for the spiritual welfare of the child. Do it again. For the spiritual welfare of the child. Education, for example. And education means teaching them to be an upright person, teaching them the importance of putting in effort, teaching them the importance of doing mitzvahs, teaching them the importance of working hard. Working hard. It's a very important value. And the importance of being confident, not anxious, not worried. Meaning to say, Hashem entrusted them with an extremely precious deposit, a godly soul from on high. And Hashem has the hope and expectation that the parents will complete their assignment and see to it that this child's soul will be overtly expressed, openly expressed in everything he or she does. A job well done means that when looking at this child, one should be able to identify that this is a member of the nation that was told by God, "You shall be to me a kingdom of princes and a holy nation." When you see this child walking down the street, the child looks like a member of this nation and walks confidently like a mensch, but not only like a mensch, openly and overtly expressing what the child is, a member of the nation. And that is the job description, the division of responsibility for the parent, the biological partners of the relationship. When it comes to the physical needs of the child, that he be properly fed, clothed, and be healthy, etc., providing the means with which the parent will teach the child how to use it properly, that part of the partnership is God's share of the partnership. Division of responsibilities. And the Rebbe ends off. When the parents observe this side of the partnership, taking the education of the children correctly, to understand that my part is to create an upstanding Jew, works hard, appreciates their responsibility, knows their mitzvahs, knows their confidence, then Hashem observes his side of the partnership, providing the parents all their needs, whether it be finances, health, etc. So may it be in each and every one of our personal lives. Thank you very much for joining. I'm sorry we went over time. If anyone has any questions, comments, suggestions, please speak up, unmute yourself. Thank you very much. May Hashem bench every one of us with shining nachas, with confidence and excitement and passion to continue educating the children around us and the children within us. Thank you very much.
Amen.
Thank you. Rabbi Cohen, can I ask a question?
Yes, absolutely.
You said there's so many things you've read there, and it said the biological parents.
Yes.
The biological parents cannot bring up a child, and that child is adopted. Do the adoptive parents who take on the role of the biological parents still have exactly the same things to do, or is it different because they are not the biological parents?
I'll be honest, I don't know the answer from inside, but I'll say what I think. That it's a mitzvah without the obligation. In other words, basically
do your best
you to become a foster parent. But if you do what a parent is supposed to do, if one manages to educate and raise a child as a partner with Hashem, wow. So could Beis Din legally mandate the parent to do it? They're not biological parents and therefore don't owe it necessarily, so to speak, to the child. But they've taken it upon themselves? Wow. The mitzvah in the scripture.
Because it's true that every Jewish child is your child and my child. They're not
correct.
One person.
So we do have obligation as a raven. Interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
No, okay. And thank you for answering. You're now back on your pedestal. Thank you very much for a wonderful share.
You're most welcome. Hashem should give us a tzlacha and bracha. Gesundheit.
Thank you.
Be good. Have a good week, everybody. Thank you for joining.
I'll be good and boring. Thank you.
All the best. Take care, everybody.
Bye.